Good morning. Just doing a bit of a market update for Bitcoin specifically, but also in general, given that Powell's speech was last night, which I said was going to be the more important factor. And what did we get? An absolute rodeo of downside pressure. This was mostly due to the revised rate cuts for next year. So more specifically, this week, just to look at economic data that's coming out on Friday, we got retail sales for Great Britain, not super big, but the core PCE, personal income and personal spending, these are going to be the last major ones going into the end of the year. And then obviously next year we have, the initial rate cuts and whatnot. So the reason why the markets tanked and why everyone got really skittish because they revised down the expectation for cuts. So out of the 19 officials that are seeing cuts for next year, they revised it down from potentially even 4 or 3. So 10 of the 19 see at least 2 cuts, while it starts to get very, very low at 3 cuts and 4 cuts. And this was kind of like the economic projection, with the idea being that starting next year, they're going to start, continuing aggressively cutting rates, but they're doing it slowly because their argument is based off of inflation data. So for right now, that's kind of like the big shock, and that's why we were expecting some big movement from Powell speaking. He definitely had a more hawkish tone on rate cuts, as and it spooked the market really bad. In any case, going through Bitcoin, we're seeing the big flip because we've lost a lot of levels, and the buyback has been strong this morning. However, it was very weak last night. We're at in the last 4 hour, on the 4 hour time frame, going from yesterday morning to today, we saw a massive increase from almost 60% Wednesday night, Thursday morning, of shorts. Now we're majority long, so this means that retail traders are pressing the green button. That's not good. That means that if the majority of retail is trying to long this, the majority of always gets wrecked, right? So we've got that downside pressure potentially building, and the weaker the bearish retests are, the more downside we're going to get. We got a big liquidation event. Let's see if we actually get some buyback and some pre-priority up. But for right now, just in the last 2 hours or so, we've seen a little bit more aggressive shorting just into some high structure, but we want to see this start coming down really aggressively and getting the longs back towards 50-50, with price going higher. With the funding rates are actually quite neutral bullish across the board. OKX, obviously the big outlier at a negative rate, so incentivizing long positions, but neutral bullish, I guess, since it's under 0.01. It's still not perfect, it's not awesome, but it's better than expected. With the liquidations, obviously, we talked about this, about all of the long liquidity, the high leverage stuff that's stacked up. We talked about the sweep of the liquidity from the lows, that we got the break under 100K back down towards 98.7. So that's mostly done. We'll see what happens when we get up to this 102.6, 102.7. This was our big swing level from earlier. Let's see if this is the inflection point that we can actually gain and then go a little bit flat and sideways going into the long weekend. If we start rejecting and start building back into the low, the problem we have is if we start clearing back below 100K at this point, it opens up the high leverage liquidity that still exists down to about 96K. 96K to 95K, there's still good demand. We want to see this. If we are going to do the move, I want to do it now and do it painfully, and then in the weekend of the week and the weekend on a good note. Also, this nuke pretty much telegraphed in the sense that that sneaky closes that we got earlier, we lost the level, we cleared that CME gap completely, and now we're just trying to settle as the market is feeling the pain from yesterday. So looking at the chart specifically for Bitcoin, this is kind of the general plan. It broke down really, really hard last night. We've had some nice buybacks from our big daily swing level, 98.9, getting back up into that 102.6, 102.7K zone, basically the previous high structure we talked about earlier in the week. So this is going to be key as far as the inflection point. If we get really weak retests here, it just means that we're failing to break back above to regain priority. The weekly open must be regained for any semblance of priority back up. We talked about sneaky closes. On, I think it was Wednesday and potentially even Tuesday. Yeah, Tuesday we talked about it. We got a really bad close followed by a really bad retest. And then yesterday we got the glorious little off a cliff close under the weekly open, bearish back test, an absolute nuke. It was a free ride. It was awesome, and it panned out perfectly with timing with Powell's speech. So with that being said, we flushed out all that local stuff to the downside. We can see if we can do some regains here. We've had a pretty nice, 12-hour period from the daily open. We've got some potential support here, and basically the way it's looking at is if we start failing into these levels, breaking back below 100K, I would expect this to flush since that low's already taken out. I would expect us any losing of 100K that we get the full move back down towards 97, potentially all the way back down towards December, and even 95, where there still is tons and tons of demand. I think all of these levels are potentially support. However, we are still now looking a little bit more downward, especially if we get the secondary failures here. Then we're looking for that downside, the continuation, the regain that starts to fix this problem, and we get a strong buyback only occurs if we regain the weekly open. We need to get back above some of these levels, especially given how hard the downtrend was yesterday. Getting back above that previous daily open, which is realistically very far above us. Like daily open, the best possible close we could get today would be back above yesterday's daily open at 106, which is a far cry from where we are right now. We've got a lot of weakness in the market. We've got some fear coming back in. Everyone's kind of got smacked down really hard. If we're going to start the bigger retracement, and if we go any lower than this 100K zone, I would argue that then this is the first major retracement of the bull run, in which case the next stage might be the continuation of Bitcoin, but also a harder rotation into alts. It just depends if the market can stabilize enough to continue. Just to touch on it real quick, since we're here, these liquidation levels are still in place. We have some stuff back below us here that we saw on the other liquidation chart as well. We flushed all the high leverage stuff. There's some good retesting at key levels above us, but the real question is if we can regain the weekly. There's not a lot of liquidity up here. We did the move very, very quickly. That's the one level we want to see regain for some regain of priority. A lot of resistance, a lot of sell pressure, a lot of fear in the market. So we're seeing a bit of a shift. So act accordingly. And if you're having issues with any of these short structures, just invert the chart. It's the best tool on TradingView. Invert the chart and see what you're actually doing. Are you really just continuing the trend? Yes. On the higher time frame, the trend is not broken. What breaks the trend? That 95K, that high there really, really starts to break things across the board. So we can still recover this. It's not all doom and gloom and end of the world. But any further loss of 95K would start breaking this upside trend, and we start talking about going back to the 80s. Until then, trade cautiously. We're getting into this is like 2 days left before the end of this trading week, which is the last full trading week of the year. And then coming up next week on Friday, we have the not the FOMC, the quarterly options unlock as well, which should free up a lot of liquidity. So keep those things in mind. Watch the markets here, see if we get those retest failures. Be very quick to say if we're getting really strong buybacks, regaining levels we've lost that led to this low. Then we start flipping our bias back to the upside. But for right now, we've got a little bit of bias check back down. Watch these kind of bearish failures, see if we can get some type of reprioritization up. But you got to play the price action. That's it. Take it easy.